Nolan Wells' audio distress call. Is it real?
Everyone in the background is saying, is he dead? Nolan, wake the up.
Claiming they're sinking and calling for help. And yet in the background, are we really hearing all of this other activity?
Nobody has ever, none of the kids on this boat have ever admitted that anybody said that they thought Nolan was dead.
That question is now at the center of the Nolan Wells case. It's the same question a national television panel spent an hour arguing about, and it's the question this video is answering with documents, not speculation. This is the audio. A boat off Horn Island, taking on water, calling for a tow. Online, thousands of people claim there's something else buried in the background of this call, Nolan's name spoken in panic. Officer Brandon Tatum went on Nancy Grace's show and said that claim doesn't hold up. Here's what the evidence actually shows. Drop a comment if you've heard this audio before. Subscribe now. This case isn't closing anytime soon. A captioned version of this audio went viral with subtitles claiming the background contains phrases like, "Is he dead?" and Nolan's name. That version spread fast and got treated online as proof something happened to Nolan before the boat ever left the island. Here's the problem. The version most people reacted to wasn't the original file. The original came from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources through an official records request. Every viral copy since then has been re-uploaded, re-edited, and recaptioned. Each version adds a new layer of interpretation on top of the last one. Crime Story's investigative reporter Dave Mack addressed this directly on air. His team used standard audio engineering, filtering out low rumble below 80 Hz, cutting high hiss above 8 kHz, and boosting the mid-range frequencies where human speech sits. That process makes existing sound easier to hear. It does not add words that weren't there. Digital forensics analyst Todd Shipley made a related point. The copies circulating on social platforms have been stepped on multiple times, meaning recompressed, re-uploaded, and re-edited by accounts with no forensic training. Once a captioned version tells viewers what to listen for, most people hear exactly that, whether or not it's actually on the tape. Forensics analyst Robert Freed raised a separate concern.
Hey, you say there are a lot of red flags. What are they?
Absolutely. Nancy, what I look at evidence is it possible to authenticate the evidence, the information that's being provided? Think about when you download software from a website. Many websites give you a value next to that file because they want you to know that what you're downloading can be kind of authenticated or validated. When we're receiving audio like this from the source, it would be good and proper if people are going to start looking at this and doing examinations to actually apply some kind of hash value or some kind of way to uniquely identify this particular file as an original so people can validate what they're looking at.
Authentication. He pointed out that none of the widely circulated versions carry a hash value or chain of custody documentation, the kind of verification that would let anyone confirm a specific copy matches the original file exactly. He also flagged that some versions online are missing roughly 20 seconds compared to others, sections where personal information like phone numbers appears to have been redacted. That's the real dispute here, not whether the recording is authentic, whether the copies circulating online have been altered, trimmed, or taken out of context by the people spreading them. There's also a simpler explanation worth stating plainly. Investigative reporter Dave Mack, who covered this audio directly for Crime Stories, confirmed his team's process was fully documented, meaning every step they took to enhance the audio could be independently reproduced and checked by anyone else. That's different from an anonymous account online applying unknown filters, adding captions, and presenting the result as definitive. Officer Brandon Tatum, a former Tucson police officer, had already interviewed several of Nolan's friends before this audio went viral. His case, multiple witnesses told him, independently, and before the audio controversy even started, that Nolan was seen alive on the island after the boat left. A text message from Katie, the young woman Nolan was with that afternoon, states she never saw him get back on the boat. Video footage of the boat pulling away reportedly does not show Nolan among the passengers.
Killed because we have witnesses that have come out. When I interviewed Warren, a lot of those kids that I talked to already alluded to this way before the audio came out, that they were gone. And people had already saw Nolan after they had left. The young lady, Katie, that he was hanging out with, I saw a text message from her alluding to the fact that she never saw him get on that boat at all. We have video of the boat that we shared on our social media page, and it shows all the occupants on the boat, and Nolan was not there. And so if a person thinks that they've heard something on the audio, they have to compare it with context. Maybe they said, "Is it dead?" talking about items that could potentially have died or damaged on the boat, given the fact that they were sinking. So I think people need to put this in context and reevaluate what they're listening to on the video, because if you are...
His conclusion, this is not doctored audio. It's a chaotic, muffled recording, and people are filling in the unclear parts with the worst possible interpretation. He suggested the disputed phrase could just as easily be a reference to a piece of equipment, the failing bilge pump, or the dead battery, not a person. He also raised a direct question. If something serious had already happened to Nolan on that boat, why would the group spend roughly 8 minutes on the phone, calmly relaying GPS coordinates and requesting a routine tow, instead of asking for emergency medical help or the Coast Guard? That behavior, he argued, doesn't match the theory. Tatum also pushed back on an assumption baked into a lot of the online commentary, that with hundreds of boats and thousands of people at Horn Island that day, someone would have automatically witnessed anything serious. He argued that large crowds don't guarantee witnesses. People are focused on their own boats, their own conversations, not scanning the water for a crisis they don't know is happening. In a separate interview, Tatum described the friend group directly. He said the young men he spoke with were respectful, close with their families, and by his account genuinely devastated. Several were reportedly upset they couldn't attend Nolan's funeral. He also noted nearly all of them cooperated with investigators voluntarily and underwent a form of cognitive interview testing early in the case, before most had retained attorneys. That detail, he said, doesn't fit the pattern he'd expect from a group actively concealing something. Tatum raised a third possibility, beyond an accident or a cover-up, that Nolan may have wandered off alone, away from the crowd, and gotten caught in a current near the island's west side, an area locals reportedly describe as having a strong undertow. He noted that multiple drownings happen at Horn Island most years, and that in a crowd of hundreds, drinking, loud music, someone stepping away briefly wouldn't necessarily draw attention until it was too late. Nancy Grace didn't accept that at face value. Her panel raised a separate, unresolved issue, a mark on the back of Nolan's head, documented in a second independent autopsy. Forensic pathologist Joe Scott Morgan explained that the mark has defined margins, almost rectangular, which is why a second examiner flagged it for further review. He was also clear that the finding remains pending, not conclusive. Trial attorney John Mobley pushed back on the significance of that mark, calling it a detail people have latched onto out of desperation for any lead. Morgan disagreed directly, pointing out that the second examiner conducted a multi-layered dissection of the area, something the state's original autopsy hadn't done, specifically because the mark's shape raised questions the first examination didn't answer. Neither side backed down on air. Subscribe now. The next part is the most important piece of this case. There's a second forensic detail that gets less attention than the audio, but carries more actual weight. The state's original autopsy removed Nolan's throat and lungs, and did not return either to the family. Removing lungs during a water death autopsy is routine. It's how examiners check for drowning. The throat is different.
And his relative to the second examination is that he did a multi-layered dissection. Now, this area had not been dissected by the ME's office in Mississippi. So what he's doing is he's going layer by layer. We're talking about the skin.
Morgan explained that examiners retain the organs of the neck, specifically to check whether breathing was compromised before death, whether the airway shows any sign of trauma, hemorrhage, or crushing. When Nolan's body arrived for the second independent autopsy, those organs weren't there. That meant the independent examiner, Dr. Roger Mitchell, was working without two of the most important pieces of tissue for determining whether someone actually drowned. Dr. Mitchell's final finding was that both the cause and manner of Nolan's death are undetermined, not drowning, not homicide, undetermined. Board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Judy Melinek has explained publicly that drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion. Examiners rule out every other possible cause first, and that process becomes significantly harder in a body that's already been autopsied once and has undergone several days of decomposition. Why the throat and lungs weren't sent for the second exam has not been explained on the record by Mississippi state authorities. There's a documented reason state examiners sometimes retain organs of the neck rather than release them with the body. It gives officials the ability to go back and re-examine that tissue later or consult additional specialists without needing to exhume anything. Retaining those organs during an active investigation isn't automatically evidence of wrongdoing, but retaining them without telling the family's independent examiner in advance, before that examiner traveled to conduct a second exam, is a separate question, one the state has not addressed publicly. The independent autopsy was delayed for weeks before results were released. Attorney Ben Crump had initially projected an earlier timeline for preliminary findings, then walked that back, citing flight cancellations that affected transporting Nolan's body to Washington, D.C. for the exam. That delay meant Nolan's body underwent additional decomposition between the state's first autopsy and the family's second one, which Dr. Melinek has said makes any drowning determination significantly harder regardless of which organs were or weren't available. No one on that panel, not Tatum, not the digital forensics experts, not Nancy Grace, stated on record that the audio itself was fabricated or artificially generated. The forensics dispute was narrower than that. Fried raised concerns about chain of custody, authentication, and missing seconds in re-uploaded versions. Shipley countered that basic audio enhancement, isolating frequency ranges, cutting background hum, doesn't change the underlying content. It just makes existing audio easier to hear. So the real question isn't real or fake, it's altered or not, and that distinction has been lost in most of the online conversations surrounding this case. Here's what is actually documented. Mississippi's official GPS tracking data on the boat, obtained through a records request, shows a roughly 30-minute gap between when the distress call went out and when the boat's GPS shows it actually departing Horn Island. No one involved in this case, not the friends, not investigators, has offered a detailed, on-record explanation for that window. That's not a rumor pulled from a captioned clip. That's sitting in the official state records. This case has already had two other pieces of evidence collapse under scrutiny. A viral video appearing to show an argument over a phone was, for a period, treated online as proof of a confrontation involving Nolan. The person whose voice was actually on that recording came forward publicly and confirmed it wasn't Nolan at all. It was him, in an unrelated dispute. A photo claiming to show Nolan alive at a pool party after the 4th of July was later dated, through independently obtained metadata, to more than a week before the Horn Island trip. Both pieces of evidence were treated as settled fact online. Both were wrong. The audio claim may be heading in the same direction. That does not mean the underlying case is closed, and it does not mean every unresolved question surrounding Nolan's death is nothing. It's worth separating these categories clearly, because this case has all three. Claims that have been directly disproven, the argument video, the pool party photo, claims that remain genuinely unverified either way, whether the audio contains any reference to Nolan at all, and separate allegations about how a tip line connected to this case was routed internally, and claims that are documented and still sitting unexplained, the 30-minute GPS gap, the missing throat and lungs, and an allegedly wiped Snapchat account on Nolan's recovered phone that his mother says she found empty of July 4th content. Treating all three categories the same way, dismissing the whole case because some early claims fell apart, or accepting every claim because a few of them turned out to matter, would be a mistake in either direction. The Jackson County District Attorney has confirmed this case will go to a grand jury once the Sheriff's Office completes its investigation. That is standard procedure in Jackson County for unnatural or unexplained deaths. It does not, on its own, mean criminal charges are coming. Nolan's legal team and local law enforcement have agreed to a joint, simultaneous inspection of his phone, meaning forensic experts from both sides examine the device's data together, in the same room, at the same time. Legal analysts following the case have called that arrangement unusual, a reflection of how much distrust has built up between the family and investigators. That distrust has a documented starting point. The initial search for Nolan after he was reported missing on the night of July 4th, grew to include the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service. A National Park Service ranger found his body on July 6th, off the island's northwestern tip. Identification was confirmed through dental records. Early public statements from the sheriff and county coroner described no immediate signs of foul play, a conclusion the family disputed from the start, which is part of why they pursued an independent autopsy in the first place. As of now, roughly 60 witnesses have been interviewed. The independent legal team working with the family says it has received dozens of tips a day from people who were on Horn Island that day. The state's official toxicology report, which could resolve several open questions about the timeline, has not yet been publicly released. Until it is, any specific claims about what was or wasn't in Nolan's system that day remain unconfirmed. So while the audio claim doesn't hold up the way it spread online, the case itself is still open, and several documented details, the 30-minute GPS gap chief among them, remain unexplained. Under Mississippi law, families are entitled to an official incident report within 72 hours of a death. That deadline passed without one being delivered. For an extended stretch after Nolan's death, the family's only direct contact from the sheriff's department was a single text message, one Nolan's mother had to initiate herself. It later came out that communication had been quietly reassigned to a victim advocate within the district attorney's office, a handoff that was never directly explained to the family at the time. Attorney Ben Crump has stated publicly that the district attorney's office intends to move this case to a grand jury once the sheriff's office concludes its investigation and all evidence is collected. Legal analysts covering the case note that grand jury proceedings in Mississippi are conducted privately. No defense attorneys, no family legal team, only a prosecutor presenting evidence to a panel of citizens who then decide whether probable cause exists for an indictment. The audio isn't the mystery here. What happened in that 30-minute gap still is. So does the explanation for two missing organs that could have settled the drowning question outright. And so does the identity of the last person confirmed to have spoken with Nolan before he disappeared. Nolan Wells was 18, a wide receiver with a future already in motion, working toward a 4-year program on top of his first year at Southwest Mississippi Community College. Whatever this audio does or doesn't prove, his family is still waiting on a complete, documented answer, not the version that spreads fastest online. Type truth if you want a real answer on this case, not the loudest one. Subscribe so you catch the next verified update the moment it drops.